myself and Ava from Ava. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm Charné. I work for CAS, as David mentioned, and I'm a service designer. So I work a lot with charities, looking at how they can make the best use of digital to support their service users. And I've worked across a number of different Tech for Good programs, and that's kind of where the beginnings of DigiSafe started. And really, my role on this project has been to kind of project lead. So working with a number of brilliant collaborators to bring this forth. And I'll let Ava introduce herself as well.
Hello everyone. So yeah, my name is Ava from Ava, just to confuse everyone. So my role within the organisation, so Ava is a violence against, a gender-based violence charity. So we've come from this because we want a kind of digital journey, and we've kind of got expertise around kind of how to deliver trauma-informed care. And then sort of ourselves have kind of been on a digital journey for the last kind of couple of years on how we can use digital to improve access to services or information or things like that. And my role within the organisation is I basically lead on all of our digital work. So that's kind of how we got involved with DigiSafe, basically.
Thanks, Ava. So a quick introduction to DigiSafe. We launched DigiSafe in June of this year. And essentially it's a step-by-step safeguarding guide for charities who are designing new service or taking existing services online. And yes, background. And we've had, like I said, some brilliant partners to work with during this project. I think one of the main things to highlight is the reason why this came about. We were doing a lot of work with a variety of different charities who were working with target audiences across the spectrum, from domestic violence and abuse service users, and then also young people, as well as kind of people with very mixed digital skills. And when the pandemic hit, essentially we found that there was a lot of confusion and also a lot of challenges around how to take services online and promote a safe space while you're doing that. So that's kind of really where this came about, in that we were getting a lot of inquiries either through our personal DMs and emails, or through some of the programs we were running for many charities who were just looking for some clear and practical guidance of how to take their services online safely and what sort of steps to follow. So essentially a little bit of a checklist to understand how to do it, and some examples of how to do it. So just a bit of an overview of kind of who's been involved with this. So we got a little bit of funding from the Cloth Workers Foundation and the Catalyst to actually design this work. It really builds on some of the foundation of the work that Ava has been doing for quite a long time. So they had an initial safeguarding guide that we built on, and we used that as a foundation. And essentially we worked in a very fast 2-week sprint to collaborate with people like these people mentioned on the screen. So Ava, Joe Robeson, as well as Side Labs, who helped us with the design of the content and the actual tool. And the platform is currently in alpha stage, which means that we're still testing it out. This is essentially a first version that we're hoping to build on, and we hope to learn more as we go. And that's really the approach that we take with design, is kind of learning as we go and trying to improve step by step.
So I think I'm just going to quickly kind of go through what you would expect from the tool. So I think the first thing that we were really clear on when we first started designing this is that we wanted something that was quite easy to use, so that anyone could pick up and kind of follow the steps and give them the confidence to kind of think about safeguarding in a digital space versus that physical space. And I think a lot of organizations have got, you know, that safeguarding is kind of inbuilt through all of the kind of services they deliver, regardless of kind of who, especially if they're dealing with vulnerable users. And so what we wanted to do was create something that kind of make them feel how you start thinking about that in a digital way. And I think the first thing that's really important is that in many ways it's no different to doing safeguarding in a physical space. So you kind of start off with this idea that, you know, you have to create a system that is quite flexible and it's kind of like a living document. So it's not something that you do once and then you kind of forget about and put it in the drawer. It's very much about creating that policy that can be worked into practice. So as you can see here, the first thing would be that, you know, you kind of do that risk assessment. What are the risks? How you do it? Then you kind of think about the design of how do you build that within that design. Then you look at the this again, and then you keep on going around that circle every time you kind of look at a service or look at changing things or kind of developing something in a digital space. Can I have the next slide, please? So just to kind of go through what's actually in the DigiSafe tool. So the first thing is very much about building on the foundations. So again, it's about integrating those existing policy practices and the kind of legal requirements around safeguarding. They're exactly the same, whether it's in a digital space or in a safeguarding space. In a digital space or in a physical space. And so I think the first thing is really important is about how it then provides you kind of a template of how you would, for instance, go about doing that risk assessment. And what is really important about that is it's quite dynamic. So it's about kind of picking those things up as you go, because I think with all of us, when we kind of look at providing services to people, we can have an idea of the risks and we can look at those and try and mitigate them, but then certain things will happen that will go, okay, we need to relook about that. So again, it's about creating that kind of dynamic way of doing it. And then the next stage of it is very much looking at those kind of like universal principles of safeguarding. So things around how do people behave differently online than they do in a physical space, and thinking about that, like what do you know about your users or your clients, your beneficiaries, to be able to do that. And then thinking about things like consent and privacy and accessibility. So it's again going through all of those processes. So what do we want to achieve? How do we mitigate those risks? What are the legal, so for instance, around privacy, it's obviously things around GDPR and things like that, but as well with consent. So again, it's about going through those principles kind of quite robustly internally, so that you can kind of work out how you kind of go around mitigating them and kind of thinking of them in very much in a trauma-informed way. So that's something that we're really keen on at Ava, is about understanding how you deal with an individual that might be quite vulnerable, but in a way that gets them to feel safe and ready to kind of open up and things like that. But also the flip side of that is how you as the staff member feel as well. So I think that's something really, really important to remember about doing things within a digital space, is that relationship can be quite different in a digital space. You know, we've all kind of, we were saying at the beginning of this that very much we all kind of got a bit of Zoom fatigue, and we do communicate in a different way on Zoom than we do in face-to-face. So it's again just kind of picking up on those things, so things like body language or facial cues, and then also about accessibility around that digital, whatever digital tool you use. So do people know how to use it? Do they need support to feel confident about using it so that they don't feel that it's a barrier? And then, as I said, the kind of idea about consent and privacy, which is very much kind of following GDPR rules. And I think very much to mention, especially if you're working with children, is to be really, really kind of aware about what that means. How do you build in consent that's very much informed consent, which is really, really important. And then kind of getting to grips with the idea of information security. So again, it's that idea of it feels like quite a big and quite terrifying thing. We hear about people getting hacked and things like that, but actually how do you put in little kind of touch points that means that you've got privacy built in? So what are your Zoom setting like? You know, do you have to log in? Where is that information kept? So it's all of those sort of questions that you need to answer yourself. And then again, it's about very much kind of thinking about that both from your kind of client set, but also from your staff. What skills and confidence do they need to be able to do that? And And so then, so we kind of overview the kind of principle side of it, and then there's some specific guidance around certain digital mediums, such as using video-based tools, or whether it's kind of chatbots, or whether you've kind of got a forum and things like that to give you a little bit of kind of more detailed information and some signposting and some additional resources that can be used. And then the last bit is very much about, once you've kind of done all that, is how you go about implementing that. And I think the really key thing into that is very much thinking about your staff and what do they need to be able to feel confident using tools in a digital space.
Thanks, Ava. So Ava already mentioned some of the types of services that we've included in DigiSafe, and just to give you kind of a bit of an overview, and I just want to jump back and just mention also that I think one of the great things about working with Ava on this project has just been the depth of experience that they bring from a trauma-informed perspective. Just thinking about those different scenarios and those different settings, which has been so instrumental to kind of designing this guide and looking at kind of how we position the content design as well. But these are some of the kind of more in-depth areas that we go into. So thinking about things like video-based services, messaging-based services, live chats, online groups, forums, and then kind of thinking about how you educate everyone about that. And each section goes into a lot more detail about some of the key risks to be aware of, as well as kind of some examples of case studies of where this has been used. We've been doing a lot of work recently on with Catalyst on service recipes. So it's kind of like a step-by-step guide of how you might reuse existing technology and think about how you implement these different services. So there's some really great case studies in there, and then also some kind of further reading. So if you're a bit more interested in specific topics around different types of video-based services and which may be best for you, that's all in the guide as well, and lots of signposting to really useful resources.
So in terms of our next steps, as Charné mentioned at the beginning, this is kind of an alphabet version. So we kind of did it quite quickly, kind of in response to what was going on in the wider world. Very much, you know, COVID happened, everyone was suddenly having to be thrust into this providing services in a digital space that they hadn't necessarily planned for or weren't quite ready to do, but they had to do it kind of at quite high speed to ensure that people were getting the kind of support they needed. And so very much we did it in that space where it was very quick, get it out there. And so at the moment it's very much about kind of gathering that feedback, how people are using it, is there anything else that would be useful to include in it? You know, how easy is it to flow? Does it give you kind of the confidence to go off and try these things yourself, and what kind of success you've had? So it's very much about kind of gathering that feedback at the moment. And as we mentioned before, very much our approach to all of this is kind of including that idea of a kind of trauma-informed service throughout it. So how has that helped when you're kind of designing a project from the offset? What does that end product look like? So kind of finding all of that information. And then, as we said, it's always the case of we would love to do more work, but finding funding for it is always always the big challenge. And then I would also say, as part of our work at Ava, is that we also kind of provide a webinar for charities around digital safeguarding, again, that kind of runs through some of the principles in a bit more detail, and a chance for people to kind of ask Q&As. And we also kind of run a more kind of in-depth training program, which is about half a day, which again kind of runs through all of these principles in a far more kind of in-depth way and interactive way. So again, if you visit our website, you can find out more about those. And we've also, this all started from a guide that we kind of put together for Comic Relief, which is also freely available on our website as well, which kind of gives more kind of a bit more, I think it's more kind of guidance instead of this kind of flow procedure. So again, that would be quite useful to have. So that's me done.
Thanks, Ava. Yeah, I think the only thing to call out as well is that, yeah, we're really keen to kind of talk to people who've used this. And so we're doing some kind of one-to-one interviews to really understand what's useful, where the gaps are, and how we can further improve it, and also what kind of follow-on support might be necessary, and what's needed as well. So if anybody on this call has tried it out or is keen to try it out, and you're interested in having a conversation, please do get in touch with me. I'll also share my email in the chat. But yeah, hopefully that's been useful. And we're going to stop there and give an opportunity for questions. I'm not sure if we're doing that now, David, or after all the speakers.
Thanks a lot, Charné, and for a really quick whistle-top tour of the what's quite a comprehensive guide. So thanks for that. I suggest we do take a couple of questions now, seeing as we've got a couple that come through Slido. I'll just.
Shall I? I'm there, David. Yeah. There's a question about Ava, if you could just give a quick example of how you've created supportive environments for your staff volunteers to enable them to provide digital support confidently.
I think so. One of the key things for us is so we don't provide frontline services. We build capacity and training for other organizations to do it quite a lot of the time. And I think one of the things that we've learned over the way is that it's quite a lot about it is having those conversations and getting to grips with where the kind of anxieties are. So one of the things I would say is, for instance, when a quite sort of in our sector, in the women's sector, when kind of groups were moved on into online, one of the things that we kind of went through was thinking about, what does a confidential space look like? What does a safe and confidential space look like if you're working over, for instance, Zoom? So before, people would be meeting up, in public places or in particular centres, and so they would know that, for instance, the perpetrator wasn't about. So again, it's about, how do you ask those questions? How do you establish those relationships? And I know that sounds quite a kind of broad way, but I think that it's about having those conversations. And I think the other thing that would be really key in terms of staff is that one of the things that we're really acutely aware of is that you're bringing that into your home. So before, there would be that kind of, especially if you're kind of doing quite complex cases, is that there would be that definition between what you were doing in your work life, and now it's kind of gone into your home. So again, it's about having those tools at your side to be able to kind of create a gap between it. So one of the things we say is to making sure that if your staff are, for instance, having to do a lot of video calls with quite vulnerable, complex cases, is to make sure that there's inbuilt check-ins with, let's say, their line manager at every point, so they don't feel they're holding that by themselves. So I think that's one of the really important things. And also, just one of the key things for all of us is providing that training in that space to be able to air those issues, and so that people can talk them through.
Brilliant, thank you. And have we got time for another question, David, do you think?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so any case studies on key benefits alongside the risks? So this might be for Charné, there might be for some of the other projects that were involved, I don't know, but services that can be added or done better online than face-to-face.
I'm happy to take that. I think we've, like I said, we've linked through to quite a lot of our service recipes, and there's a balance of kind of identifying some of the opportunities and some of the benefits of taking services online, but then also some of the risks. So we really focus on kind of the risk and safety element of this within DigiSafe. But I think for a lot of the examples that we've provided and a lot of the case studies we've provided, there's definite benefits too. Some of the things we've heard quite a lot of from organizations is just being able to kind of increase their reach, where they previously would have been limited to kind of their immediate area. So thinking about how they can support more people across the country as opposed to just people within their local vicinity. So yeah, I'd definitely say dive in, take a look. There's lots of great stuff there. And yeah, if you have any further questions, please feel free to follow up.
I've just added the service recipe link into chat. So yeah, great place to look.
Thanks a lot, Charné, Eva, again, and thanks for those questions. Can I just quickly check a quick show of hands? Who's actually already used the DigiSafe guide in their work? So a few of you, great. If you do end up using it and testing it out, it'd be great if you could get back to Charné and Eva with some feedback, so that we can refine it and make sure it's all, yeah, it meets your needs. So that'd be fantastic. Thanks again, Charné and Eva. I know how super busy you all are, so thanks a lot for taking the time.